Hey guys! Tonight, we're going somewhere dark. Not metaphorically dark, though. It's got its moments, but literally, we're headed deep into a 3,000-year-old tomb carved into Egyptian limestone, where the only thing thicker than the silence is the scent. You trudge past sun-cracked ruins, your sandals skimming dust older than your entire genetic line. The Nile is far behind you now. It's just you, your little torch, which is totally not sputtering, and a tight sandstone tunnel so narrow you briefly consider skipping carbs forever. And then, finally, the walls widen, the air cools, and there beyond a thin veil of ancient incense residue you smell it. Perfume. Not the department store kind with laminated ad cards and overzealous spritzers. No, this is musky, resinous, clinging, something between frankincense and maybe goat. You're not sure, but it's strong, and it's everywhere. You are standing in the burial chamber of a pharaoh, and it smells amazing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The room around you is surprisingly small. You expected grandeur, maybe gold and hieroglyphs, but instead, it's intimate. At the far end, the sarcophagus sits like a waiting storybook. Surrounding it, rows of pottery, dozens of them, vases, flasks, stone jars with elegant little lids, each one once sealed to trap a scent. Some are open now, broken, looted, but traces remain. Thick residue clings to the curves, and somehow the smell still rises. You kneel by one. There's a sticky glisten on the inside. You inhale gently, and for a moment, it's like the tomb shifts. You're not in the desert anymore. You're in a palace. Silks ripple, musicians hum, and a king, half naked and glistening with oil, is being anointed before the gods. That's the power of scent. You're not alone in this tomb. Oh, it's not haunted. Relax. I mean historically, because throughout the ancient world, Egyptians were the only ones who seemed to think smell might outlive stone. They believed scents traveled with the soul, that a pharaoh's identity wasn't just preserved in writing or flesh but in the air itself, a divine fragrance that said, I was here, I ruled, I remain. Historians still argue whether this belief came from theology or vanity because, let's be honest, pharaohs weren't known for subtlety, but these perfume pots weren't just decorative. They were engineered. Some were carved from calcite to keep sunlight from spoiling the oils. Others were double-sealed with beeswax, nature's Tupperware. A few had tiny reed plugs tied with papyrus string, like the ancient version of a boutique diffuser. And then there's the volume. You count them. 1, 2, 17, 18, 33. Why would a single dead man need over 30 perfume jars? Maybe because he was going somewhere important. To the Egyptians, death wasn't the end, it was a continuation, a departure, a voyage. And who goes on a trip? Especially a royal one without a proper toiletry bag. The perfumes were offerings, yes, but they were also tools, scents to refresh the soul, to cleanse the ka and ba, the spiritual twin and traveling spirit. Some jars held healing balms, others, well, you might not want to dab those on your wrist. Some were repellents, warding off evil, or insects, or nosy relatives, maybe, and some were just luxury, a pharaoh's favorite blend. Maybe a hint of spiced lotus oil with cinnamon, labdanum, and a drop of blue lotus. A perfume so expensive it could buy a house bottled not for the living, but the dead. There's something oddly tender about that. Imagine someone bottling your favorite coffee smell, your partner's shampoo, your dog's breath. If you're into that, just to keep it near your spirit forever. Ancient Egyptians weren't obsessed with death. They were obsessed with continuing, and to continue. They thought you had to smell good. Now here's a quirky fact you didn't ask for. Some archaeologists have reported tombs with intact scent pouches wrapped in linen and placed under the chin of the deceased. Basically, history's first scented chin straps. One theory, to help the deceased breathe scent in the afterlife. Another, ritual deodorant. Either way, ambitious. As your torchlight flickers, casting crooked shadows on the tomb wall, you notice something else. Some of the jars are labeled, not in words, but symbols. A lotus, a hawk, a squiggle that might mean ambergris, or might just be the ancient version of the Egyptians didn't just seal their scents, they sealed stories inside them. Each perfume was a chapter, a prayer, a memory disguised as aroma. And as you breathe it in, you realize this pharaoh may be gone, but he's still here, still speaking, still scenting. You probably won't survive this scent, not because it's cursed, don't panic, but because time always wins. In another 1,000 years, even this perfume will fade. But tonight, it lingers, just long enough. You shift your weight, careful not to topple a single jar, because even cracked, these little vessels feel sacred, like someone might scold you from the shadows. But instead of a voice, what greets you next is deeper. A legend, stitched into the walls and soaked into every jar here. The Egyptians believed the gods could smell, not metaphorically, like, oh, the gods can sense devotion. No, literally. The gods had noses, divine nostrils, and if you didn't smell right, you probably weren't getting into the afterlife. This wasn't just religious fluff. They baked it into ritual, every temple offering grain, wine. Bread was always accompanied by a burning scent. It wasn't enough to show up with gifts. The scent had to rise, sweet smoke curling upward like incense elevator music. Playing in the divine break room, you step toward a wall fresco. A priest in white linen is offering something up a bowl. Maybe, but next to him is a plume of smoke, carefully painted, rising into the nostrils of a god whose face is both hawk and human. That, right there, is the moment of offering, not the gift, the smell of the gift. So, yes, smell wasn't secondary. It was the signal, the handshake, the divine Wi-Fi password. And here's the funny part. Modern scholars still debate whether this emphasis on scent was mostly symbolic or literal. Did ancient priests genuinely believe Ra sniffed his offerings like some heavenly sommelier? Or was it just a poetic device, a way of making invisible worship feel physical? Historians still argue whether Egyptian theology was built on practical, ritual logic or sensory metaphor. And honestly, it was probably both. Because if you've ever smelled roasted frankincense, you know it feels sacred. That's not coincidence. The ancient Egyptians chose their scents carefully, not just for beauty, but for what each one represented. Frankincense, imported from the land of Punt, which may or may not have been real, was believed to be the sweat of the gods. Myrrh, another staple, was the scent of morning bittersweet, resinous, slightly medicinal. It clung to linen wrappings like ghostly fingers. And then there was kai-fi. Oh, sweet, complicated kai-fi. Kai-fi wasn't a perfume. It was a recipe, a ritual, a scent you brewed slowly over days by mixing dried fruits, resins, spices, honey, wine, and, well, probably whatever smelled good and didn't kill you. You'd stir it under moonlight, whisper prayers over it, maybe even hum a tune if you were feeling cheeky. The final product, a thick, dark paste that smelled like midnight, candlelight, and secrets. Kai-fi was so beloved, it had its own prayer. Imagine that, a poem written to a smell. Modern perfumers weep. One jar near the tomb wall still carries a carved glyph, a sundisk above a chalice, possibly a symbol for kai-fi, or maybe just the perfumer's signature. Either way, you get the feeling this jar mattered. You lean in again. It smells faintly of raisin and fire, and behind it, another inscription. This one depicting a pharaoh seated on a throne, with 4 priests fanning scent toward him from giant urns. Not fanning him, fanning the scent. The pharaoh is basking in clouds of aroma like some ancient influencer showing off his new fragrance line, Eternity, by Ramses. Honestly, not far off. Ancient Egyptian kings did commission signature scents. Each temple had its own formulas, and only the high priests were allowed to mix them. Why? Because scent was access. If you knew the smell, you knew the way in. You could guide the soul, ward off demons, trigger memories, even sweet-talk a god. One fringe theory even suggests that scent might have played a role in ancient hypnosis rituals. essential oils used to relax or entrance those seeking prophetic visions. Sounds wild. But have you ever walked past a cinnamon bun stand when you weren't hungry? Same energy. And yes, some of these scents were strong, probably too strong. There's an ancient poem about a woman who walks into a banquet trailing perfume like thunder. That's a direct quote, which tells you two things. Ancient people were very into dramatics, and two, perfume wasn't subtle. So, when they packed those dozens of jars into a pharaoh's tomb, they weren't thinking light citrus mist. They were packing the olfactory equivalent of an orchestra. Every scent, a note, every jar, a chord, and together, a song for eternity. It's wild to think how much trust they placed in their noses. In scent to preserve identity, anchor memory, shape devotion. You imagine them standing around the tomb as it was sealed, each person pressing a tiny jar into place with the reverence of tucking a child into bed. Maybe they even whispered, "May you be remembered by the scent of your life." And maybe, just maybe, the gods leaned in too. You linger near that jar a little longer, because now your nose has gone on high alert. The more you notice, the weirder things get. There's a sweetness in the air, but beneath it, something sour. Not unpleasant, just unexpected. Like old cheese and honey. You follow the smell like a cartoon character floating on a scent trail, and find a squat little vessel wedged behind the sarcophagus. You crack the lid. Yep, frankincense. Myrrh, maybe even cedarwood, but also antelope fat. You blink. Yes, that's real. Turns out, ancient Egyptian perfumes weren't made in fancy labs with glittering glass. They were kitchen projects. Greasy, smelly, and deeply experimental. They used what they had, and what they had often included animal fats, beeswax, crushed herbs, resins, and weird things like porcupine droppings. Yes, that happened. Historians still argue whether certain animal ingredients were for scent, texture, or symbolic value. Was antelope fat chosen because it absorbed fragrance well, or because antelopes were sacred in some funerary myths? Fringe theory alert. One late papyrus mentions a priest anointing the dead with the strength of the desert runner, which some interpret as symbolic of antelope oil, granting spiritual speed in the afterlife. Or maybe the priest just liked the smell. Either way, it got oily in here. You back away from the jar with slightly slick fingers and glance at the walls again. See those painted trays? Each one holds what looks like spices: cinnamon, cassia, saffron. Except not all of them are what you'd expect. One tray is full of juniper berries, another crushed tamarisk bark, and one has a dark paste labeled with a faded glyph that roughly translates to moon tears. That's not a poetic flourish. That's what they called it. We still don't know what it was. Some believe it was opoponax, a type of sweet myrrh. Others think it was a local blend of figs and mineral oil. One papyrus recipe includes moon tears as the final ingredient in a seduction oil meant to cause the nostrils to swell with longing. Sounds romantic. Or allergic. You imagine the perfumers standing around a bubbling pot, arguing over ratios. More cinnamon, less musk. No, not that jar, the one that smells like toasted camel hair. Trial and error, all by firelight. And yes, they kept written recipes. Some of the earliest known cosmetic and perfumery texts come from Egypt, like the Ebers Papyrus and the Berlin Papyrus, which include remedies for hair loss, bad breath, and my personal favorite, how to freshen the mouth when one's lover draws near. Step 1. Boil herbs in wine. Step 2. Swish. And do not spit. Medieval mouthwash. Egyptian edition. But perfume wasn't just about breath mints and body odor. It was political, strategic, even militarized. Take Queen Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most powerful rulers. She launched an expedition to the fabled land of Punt to bring back incense trees. Trees, not just resins. She wanted the whole roots in the ground experience. The result, a temple wall covered in murals of fragrant loot, myrrh, frankincense, ebony, gold, and baboons. And yes, that's how important scent was. People risked their lives to import smellable trees. Why? Because the pharaoh wasn't just buried with perfumes, he was perfume. His body, once wrapped and embalmed, was coated in layers of scented oils, resins, and waxes. Each layer sealed his essence, like a divine Tupperware. You think I'm kidding? The process was so thorough that when King Tutankhamun's body was discovered, The black resin used in his embalming had soaked through the wrappings and partially glued his body to the bottom of the coffin. That's right. He was mummified in what was essentially a very intense essential oil marinade. Modern analysis found ingredients like pistachio resin, cedar oil, and animal fat blended into a pungent, gummy mix. It wasn't just practical, it was divine branding. This scent is royal. You run your fingers over another jar. This one's taller, thin-necked, with ridges carved into its base like a grip. Maybe it was meant to be held while pouring, or maybe the ridges were decorative, mimicking the lotus blossom, a flower that opens only in sunlight and closes at night, symbolizing rebirth, a perfect metaphor for the afterlife. And you get the feeling that nothing here was random. Each scent, each oil, each sticky trace on the stone was curated, selected, measured, so that when the soul of the pharaoh wandered out into the duat, the underworld, it wouldn't be alone. It would smell its way forward. Back then, scent wasn't a luxury. It was a compass. You trace your finger across the faint carvings above the ridge jar, and something tickles your brain. Something familiar, but off. The nose, you've seen it before, not just in these jars, but in art, statues, wall paintings, even golden masks, each one featuring a nose that seems oddly idealized. Not just any nose, a perfect nose, sharp, sculpted, symmetrical, as if every royal in history was secretly related to a fragrance model. You chuckle softly. But then it hits you, these weren't just cosmetic choices, they were cultural obsessions. The Egyptians didn't just value scent, they worshipped the infrastructure of scent. The nose itself, the organ of spiritual connection, the gateway to divine awareness. A person's nose wasn't just their nose, it was their receiver, their filter, their tether to the gods. One priestly text even refers to the divine organ of inhalation, which sounds like a very fancy way of saying schnoz. So when you see those statues and golden masks, yes, even King Tut's iconic mask with its delicate, arched nostrils, you're looking at more than beauty. You're looking at a symbol of connection. Fringe theory time. There's a tiny sect of scholars who believe pharaohs may have undergone early forms of rhinoplasty, not for beauty, but for ritual enhancement. No evidence of scalpels, mind you, but wax figurines show exaggerated noses, and some mummified priests had small wooden inserts placed just above the nostril bridge, possibly to elevate the sense of smell in the afterlife. Was it aesthetic or spiritual tuning? Historians still argue whether these practices were medical enhancements, cosmetic illusions, or theatrical prosthetics for ritual drama. But one thing is clear, the nose mattered. You shift your gaze back to the fresco. A priest holds what looks like a reed wand tipped with oil. He's anointing the nose of the deceased, not the forehead, not the chest, the nose. Because, according to ancient belief, scent didn't just please the gods, it fed the Ka, the vital life force that lingered after death. The Ka needed offerings, yes, like bread and wine, but it also needed aroma. Which brings us to something unexpectedly modern. Olfactory memory. The Egyptians didn't have neuroscience, but they knew instinctively that scent anchors emotion. That one sniff of spiced oil could bring back the full weight of a memory. A lover's touch, a coronation, a prayer. So they preloaded the tomb with smell triggers. One scent might remind the Ka of temple incense, another of the balm used at birth, and some of victory, of power, of being alive. It's like the world's first memory foam mattress, but for the soul. And not all these jars were meant to be opened. Some were sealed permanently, never to be uncorked again. Why? Because the pharaoh didn't need to smell them. He was them. They were extensions of his memory, his identity, his brand. You scan the room. Some of the jars are smooth alabaster, semi-translucent in the flickering torchlight. Others are glazed ceramic, their glossy finish cracked with age. A few are etched with hieroglyphs, spelling out what we think are scent names, though scholars are still unsure. One particularly curious example reads something like Ra's morning breath. Maybe poetic, maybe not. You try to imagine ancient perfumers in their workshops, crushing blue lotus petals, reducing resins, melting beeswax. Some worked in temples, others in palace annexes. A few, Perhaps in little stalls near the Nile, blending oils in the heat. Imagine their tools, stone mortars, reed funnels, linen strainers, the slow rhythm of grinding, stirring, humming. Now, here's a tidbit that'll stick in your sleepy brain. The world's oldest known perfume factory was discovered not in Egypt, but in Cyprus dating back to around 2000 BCE. Still, Egypt was the perfume capital of the ancient world. Its scents were exported to Greece, Rome, Mesopotamia, everywhere. To own Egyptian perfume was like owning the Apple Vision Pro of its day. Rare, flashy, and slightly confusing to operate. And pharaohs. They were the CEOs of that olfactory empire. Another oddity, some royal jars have been found with multiple scent layers. That is, one jar contains several fragrances, stacked in thin, oily strata like a trifle. Was this accidental, or an intentional scent journey open the jar, inhale, and get past life? Present glory and eternal hope in one breath? No one knows, but you really want to believe they layered it on purpose, like a Spotify playlist, but for your nose. You crouch again, watching the shadows dance across the jars, and realize that for the Egyptians, to be buried with scent wasn't just a luxury, it was the final insurance policy. If the gods forgot your name, if your statue was defaced, if your pyramid collapsed, I can't date box. Oh, your scent would still rise, and with it, maybe, your story. Your torch's flame flickers against the curved walls, and for a moment, you forget where you are. The quiet is total. The air so thick with layered scents, it feels like stepping into someone else's lungs. This isn't just a tomb anymore. It's a memory vault, and each jar, a key. You glance again at the rows of flasks, each placed with care, as if they were meant to form a map, not of land, not of stars, but of the soul's journey. Because in ancient Egyptian belief, death wasn't a sudden event. It was a slow procession, a spiritual commute, a passage filled with monsters, tests, guardians, and rivers made of fire or ink, depending on your source. And to travel that landscape, you needed more than courage. You needed to smell good. According to the Book of the Dead, a sort of cosmic guidebook for the recently deceased scents, were as crucial as amulets. Spells were often sealed with perfume. The burning of myrrh accompanied chants. Oils were rubbed into bandages as if to whisper instructions into the folds of linen. But what exactly were those instructions? Well, that depends on who you ask. Some scholars suggest the scents acted as spiritual fuel. Others believe they were emotional triggers reminding the soul of its duties, like smell-based post-it notes for eternity. Historians still argue whether the jars found in tombs were purely ritualistic or functioned as navigational aids through the dua, the shadowy underworld of Egyptian mythology. Personally, I like the idea that one whiff of lotus oil was enough to keep a soul moving when it started doubting itself. Think of the Ka, the spiritual twin, as a kind of passenger. It needed feeding, not just food, but smells. The right smell could energize it, protect it, orient it. It's no wonder tombs included dozens of fragrance jars, each sealed like a time capsule. One for strength, one for clarity, one, perhaps, for loneliness, and one just maybe for joy. Fringe Theory Corner. Some believe the positioning of the jars left side of the sarcophagus versus right had meaning. Jars placed on the western side may have aligned with the direction of the setting sun, which symbolized death and rebirth. Others think certain scents were only to be opened in the presence of Anubis, god of embalming. Is any of it provable? No, but when you stand here, surrounded by so much devotion to scent, you realize how deeply they believed in its power. And they weren't wrong. Modern science tells us that the olfactory system connects directly to the brain's limbic system, the part responsible for emotion and memory. No detours, no analysis, just straight into the soul's inbox. The Egyptians didn't know this neurologically, but they felt it. And so they gave the dead what they thought mattered most: memory, emotion, presence, all in the form of scent. There's one more thing. Look closer at the jars. Notice anything. Some are empty. That's odd. They're sealed, unbroken, but they contain only dust. You might think this was looting or age, but a handful of scholars have raised an eerie possibility. What if some jars were never filled? What if they were symbolic? an olfactory placeholder, a promise that even in silence, even in emptiness, the soul would remember. We do this too, don't we? We keep old perfume bottles, even when they're dry. We smell sweaters that don't belong to us anymore. We lean into absence, because sometimes it smells like presence. And here, in this tomb, those same instincts echo across centuries. You kneel at the base of the sarcophagus. There, carved in thin hieroglyphs, is a passage. The wind bears my scent to the horizon. Let the gods know I am near. Not I am. You close your eyes, inhale deeply, and imagine that scent reaching skyward, curling above the tomb, across the Nile, over desert sands and golden pyramids, until it finds its way to wherever souls go when memory is all they have left. And in that breath, the pharaoh is remembered. You lean back on your heels, still half tranced by the inscription, and begin to notice something else about this fragrant room. Its hierarchy. Not all jars are created equal. Some are polished to a mirror gleam, etched with precise glyphs and crowned with golden stoppers. Others, rough clay, no inscriptions, basic lids, almost anonymous. You realize what you're looking at. This is scent stratification. Welcome to the perfume class system, Ancient Egypt edition. Just like today's world of Chanel versus gas station body spray, Egyptians had scent rankings. The finest perfumes were temple-approved blends complex, rare, and often protected by priestly monopolies. Only a select few had access to these formulations, and even fewer had the authority to craft them. At the top of the scent pyramid, pun very intended, were the temple monopolies. Priesthoods, like those of Heliopolis and Karnak, didn't just handle incense. They owned the entire production chain. They imported the resins, blended the mixtures, and licensed the sale. Think ancient spiritual conglomerates with divine scent control. And of course, they taxed everything. Want some imported cardamom for your mummy oil? That'll cost extra. Need frankincense from Punt. Good luck, it's controlled by the Temple of Amun. Even cinnamon, imported through a network of trading posts that may have stretched to India, was taxed and portioned like sacred treasure. Historians still debate whether these taxes were purely economic or part of ritual safeguarding, ensuring only clean hands touch divine substances. But the result was the same. The best perfumes were filtered through layers of ritual, wealth, and control. Here's where it gets spicy, literally. Scent wasn't just about death or worship, it was political. A pharaoh could cement his authority by issuing new temple oils. Think of it like announcing a new royal decree, but it comes in a bottle and smells like eternity dipped in sandalwood. And while the top tiers of society doused themselves in these sacred blends, the lower classes made do with cheaper imitations, animal fat, mixed with garden herbs, or sometimes even recycled oils that had already been used in rituals. Yes, used. Fringe reports from ancient texts mention cleansing oils gathered from temple floor drippings being reprocessed and sold to the public. Was it resale? Recycling. Blessing on a budget. You'll never look at discount cologne the same way again. Back in the tomb, you examine a jar set apart on a small ledge. It's made of obsidian rare, volcanic glass. Its stopper, a carved onyx falcon. Fancy. Probably a royal commission. Next to it is a jar that looks tired. The glaze is faded. The seal is cracked. Inside, it's empty. But wait, not quite. A faint smudge at the bottom glows faintly in your torchlight. You lean in, sniff. Clove. Unexpected. Sharp. Almost out of place. Clove was not native to Egypt. It came from islands far to the east, possibly even Indonesia, brought by Arabian traders long before the Romans mapped the routes. Which means this pharaoh had international taste. One scholar suggests that exotic scents were seen as proof of divine favor. If a ruler could summon spices from lands beyond the horizon, surely he was favored by the gods. Scent became proof of reach. Literally, you smell this jar, and you're touching a 1,000-mile trade route. But not all scents were foreign. Some were deeply local. In fact, the region around Memphis was once considered the Chanel No. 5 of the ancient world. Local perfumers specialized in balms made from blue lotus, henna, and the ever-popular sycamore blossom, which was more symbolic than olfactory. Some believe it represented the idea of comfort or rebirth, rather than a literal smell. One perfumery near Memphis was so famous that its name appears in graffiti on other tombs, like someone tagging, "I wore House of Memphia" on the inside of their eternal Airbnb. But back to the jars. You now begin to see patterns. The expensive ones are clustered near the pharaoh's head, the humbler ones toward the feet. Was this spiritual feng shui, a way to orient the soul through scent gradients? Historians still argue whether the placement of perfume pots was guided by ritual symbolism or just spatial convenience. But in a culture where every statue, every papyrus, every burial bead had meaning, you can guess where the money is. You step back, taking it all in. This wasn't random. This was curation, a scent library, arranged for a god-king who would never read but would always remember. You take one final look at the obsidian jar, then turn your attention back toward the chamber's center. The air's changed again, deeper, spicier, almost electric. There's another jar nearby, something's leaking, but that's a mystery for later. For now, you sit in the half-dark, surrounded by the hierarchy of smell, and realize that even in death, the pharaoh stayed on top of the olfactory food chain, because when it came to legacy, stone crumbled, but scent lingered. You drift toward the leaking jar, curiosity outweighing good judgment. It's small, palm-sized, with a delicate stem and bulbous base. A fine crack runs down one side, and just beneath it, a sticky trail glows faintly in the light, golden, syrupy, and undeniably aromatic. You dab a finger against it, lift it to your nose, and wow, sweet, herbal, a little burnt. Whatever this is, it's old, but potent. The scent jumps out with an attitude. It's not subtle like myrrh or comforting like lotus. This one demands your attention. Could this be one of the 7 sacred scents of Ra? Ah yes, the elusive olfactory pantheon. Now, here's where things get murky. No tablet lists all 7. No preserved scroll offers a master recipe, but scattered across temple walls and fragmentary texts are hints, whispers of sacred blends used only in the innermost sanctuaries, reserved for the gods themselves. Some scholars say the 7 scents were symbolic, each one tied to a specific moment in Ra's daily solar journey. Others believe they were literal recipes passed down in priestly guilds, protected like state secrets. Historians still argue whether the sacred 7 were actually made and used in real rituals, or simply served as spiritual metaphors in ceremonial language. But the consistency of the references across dynasties, suspiciously specific. So, what might they have been? Here's the speculative lineup. Frankincense, the sunrise offering, crisp and purifying. Myrrh, the setting sun, bitter and grounding. Kai-fi, the midnight blend, made to invite dreams. Blue lotus oil, associated with rebirth and the Nile's flood. Cinnamon bark, a solar stimulant, tied to Ra's strength. Benzoin, resinous and sweet, a bridge between heaven and earth. Unknown fire oil, a blend so spicy it supposedly made priests hallucinate. You inhale the jar again. Fire oil. Maybe there's definitely something in here that tingles. Your sinuses twitch. Your vision sharpens just a touch. Or maybe that's the low oxygen and high imagination combo. One theory holds that priests used scent to induce altered states. Certain resins like labdanum or galbanum can be mildly psychoactive when burned in enclosed spaces. Combine that with chanting, flickering torchlight, and a whole lot of fasting, and you've got a recipe for visions. Fringe theory time. Some suspect that divine messages were less about celestial voices and more about an ancient hotbox situation. Was it worship or sensory hacking? Either way, it worked. These scents weren't just rituals, they were experiences. You step further into the chamber and spot another jar on a tall pedestal, decorated with carved sun rays and coiled serpents. Its stopper is shaped like the Eye of Horus, symbol of protection. This wasn't a casual shelf piece. This was consecrated perfume. The most sacred oils were believed to be living. Once opened, they awoke, their scent activated by warmth, touch, or flame. And once active, they weren't just smells, they were presences. You weren't smelling Ra, you were hosting him. A few temple instructions even warned priests to never inhale too deeply from certain jars without reciting protective spells. One text from the Temple of Edfu refers to the breath of the sun made flesh, which sounds dramatic, but that's Egypt for you. And it's easy to mock it from the comfort of modernity until you're here, torch in hand, alone in the dark, and something ancient hits your senses so hard you forget which century you're in. Scent was their medium. Perfume was their scripture, and the jars. Tiny gods in containers. You imagine a high priest mixing the sacred blend for Ra's morning ceremony. He's up before dawn, grinding spices in the chill, steam rising from copper pans. The mix bubbles over flame, while prayers are murmured with each stir. This isn't perfume, it's prophecy. When finished, the oil is poured into a sealed jar, its mouth kissed with incense before being stored in a temple crypt only to be opened again when Ra rises. And now, here you are, thousands of years later, catching the faintest trace of that ritual. Still here, still present, still potent. You steady yourself, mind swimming slightly in the haze of history and leftover resins. The idea that these jars held not just scent, but memory, intention, and identity starts to make terrifying sense. They weren't decoration. They were interfaces, tools to interact with the divine. You wipe your fingers on your sleeve and glance back at the cracked jar. Its trail is dry now, but its message lingers. This was part of something bigger, a system, a theology of aroma. You're starting to realize, to the Egyptians, scent wasn't a layer, it was the core. You step back from the pedestal slowly, letting the air settle, though your thoughts don't. They're still spinning, still trying to catch up with the idea that, for ancient Egyptians, scent didn't just define the sacred, it defined everything. Power, status, danger, protection, even love. And when you glance at the next row of jars smaller, lighter, almost playful in shape, you realize you're now walking into the world of scent as influence. Perfume wasn't just holy, it was strategic. You crouch near a vessel shaped like a palm leaf painted turquoise, a little chipped, and as you open it, the scent that greets you isn't spiritual. It's seductive, light, floral, tinged with honey and something teasing. This wasn't meant for the gods. This was meant for someone's neckline. You found the pharaoh's personal collection. And suddenly, the room changes. You're not in the underworld anymore. You're in a palace chamber. Marble floor cooled by servants waving palm fronds. And a pharaoh preparing for an audience or a lover. Perfume was power. And like all power, it was wielded carefully. Royalty and elite officials had their own custom blends, mixed by artisan perfumers who were sworn to secrecy. These weren't just smell-nice situations. The scents signaled rank. A certain blend might mean you answer only to the vizier. Another might mark you as a royal consort or a dangerous rival. One ancient letter even mentions a courtier being reprimanded for wearing the scent of Nubian cedar without permission. Translation: he used the wrong cologne and nearly caused a political incident. Historians still argue whether certain perfumes were formally restricted by law or simply enforced by custom and snobbery, but the consequences were real. Scent was surveillance. Here's a juicy tidbit. Cleopatra is said to have coated the sails of her barge with perfume so that Mark Antony would smell her arrival before he saw her. That's commitment. And also, a power move. So yes, scent was also a weapon. Not in the sword-fighting sense, though these spicy oils probably burned like hell if they got in your eyes, but in the social sense. A well-placed fragrance could unsettle, attract, intimidate, even manipulate. Fringe theory time. Some scholars believe certain oils were used in assassination rituals not to kill, but to mark someone as doomed. One cursed blend, described in a damaged papyrus, included hyena tallow, crushed mandrake, and the blood of a nightjar. The goal, to sour the breath of his soul, which is ancient for "may your life stink." And then, of course, there were the love spells, perfumed charms buried beneath thresholds, oils applied to skin under moonlight while reciting verses. One surviving spell reads, "Let him inhale me and forget all others." You'd think that was a modern breakup text. And while some of this sounds like superstition, remember, scent works. Modern studies show that certain essential oils affect cortisol levels, emotional memory, even behavior. So when a priest dabbed lion's heart oil on a pharaoh before battle, he wasn't just blessing him. He was priming his brain. You shift your focus back to the jars. This one smells like rose and mint. That one, thick musk and pine sap. They aren't arranged by type or strength. They're arranged like a mood board. Each jar a role, a mask, a version of the self meant to be worn for a specific audience. You find one particularly elaborate vessel, gold-rimmed, ivory-bodied, shaped like a seated cat, likely Bastet's blend, probably reserved for royal women, priestesses, or temple dancers. Inside, just a smudge of dark wax, still fragrant, and you can't help but wonder what kind of woman wore it. Was she powerful? Gentle? Did she wield her scent like a whisper or a shout? The Egyptians didn't leave behind diaries. They left scent. And here, in this tomb, you're reading their intentions through aroma. You find another jar, cracked, dusty, nothing fancy. Inside, a strange combination of mint and dried onion. Not exactly seductive, not spiritual either. A joke, a failed batch, or perhaps protective. Ancient apothecaries often believed bad smells warded off spirits. There's even a record of a pharaoh refusing to bathe before a journey to the Valley of the Kings, claiming that the stench of the living would shield him from demons. This is where the lines blur. Scent as identity, scent as illusion, scent as armor. You sit down, carefully, between two rows of vessels, and as the tomb darkens and the oils breathe around you, you realize this wasn't just a burial room. It was a theater, a place where a pharaoh could become anything, anyone, god, man, lover, ruler, through nothing but scent. And in this play, perfume wasn't the costume, it was the script. The silence shifts again, less like the absence of sound, more like a curtain drawn between acts. You rise slowly from your seat on the cold stone floor, joints crackling slightly, and move toward the side chamber. There, tucked away like a secret backstage dressing room, is something even more intimate than the pharaoh's seductive oils. The perfumer's corner, or rather, the memory of one. It's nothing grand, just a small stone platform, a few broken bowls, a bit of scorched soot on the floor, but you know the vibe immediately. This is where things got mixed. This is where scent was born. You close your eyes and imagine it. A balmy evening in Thebes, the temple courtyard emptying, the last light clinging to the stone columns. In the back room, the perfumer works. He's not a priest, exactly, not a politician either, but he holds a sacred position. He's the nose behind the curtain, the alchemist of memory. His toolkit is basic: a granite mortar, a copper ladle, linen for straining. A pot of warm animal fat sits bubbling over coals not too hot, or you'll scorch the base. The perfumer hums a quiet melody as he crushes dried lotus petals, sprinkles in cinnamon, pours in cedar resin that crackles on contact, and he waits. Because scent takes time. Unlike the stone carver or the scribe, the perfumer deals in the invisible in moments and moods. One mistake, and your oil turns bitter. Too much heat, and it dies before it even reaches the pharaoh's skin. There's something strangely comforting about this image. A man making perfume not just for royalty, but for immortality. And here's a quirky detail that brings him to life. Some ancient Egyptian recipes used wine as a solvent. Yes, wine. Not water, not oil. The thinking was, wine absorbed scent faster and helped excite the mixture spiritually. So, somewhere out there in the sands of time, there was a guy stirring sacred perfume into his Friday night Chardonnay. Historians still argue whether these wine-based recipes were symbolic or literal, but analysis of certain preserved residues suggests trace alcohols were indeed present. So maybe they were onto something. You move to the far wall, where another jar rests in a carved niche. This one's different. It's heavy lead-glazed pottery, with an odd reddish sheen. When you lift the lid, a smoky, almost leathery scent escapes. Not foul, not fragrant, just old? It might be Mendesian. Ah yes, Mendesian perfume. The legend. If Kaifi was the sacred scent of ritual, Mendesian was its worldly rival. A perfume so beloved that Roman poets wrote odes to it centuries after its Egyptian heyday. Its recipe. A mystery. Some claim it contained myrrh, cinnamon, and resin steeped in oil for 10 years to achieve its deep, almost meaty richness. Others say it was just marketing, the ancient equivalent of limited edition branding. But we know this. Mendesian perfume was expensive, strong, and built to last. One fringe story claims Cleopatra wore it at her funeral. Another suggests pharaohs were anointed with it only in moments of divine recognition when stepping into the presence of a god, or pretending to be one, which honestly feels about right. You sniff again, but there's barely anything left. Just a trace. But maybe that's enough, because every jar, every smear, every scent in this tomb wasn't about permanence. It was about recall. The Egyptians knew everything fades: flesh, fame, even stone. But for a fleeting second, scent brings it all back. And maybe that's what the perfumer understood better than anyone. He didn't just craft oils, he curated memory. He bottled presence. You glance back at the platform and notice a small inscription, half buried in dust. The nose knows the road, the soul forgets. Not the most elegant phrase, maybe, but deeply Egyptian in its logic. They believed the soul might falter, forget its name, its past, its purpose. But the scent would guide it. Like incense through a temple corridor, like perfume across the collar of a king. And maybe, if the jar was sealed just right, if the mixture was true, the dead would smell their way back to who they were, back to eternity. The deeper into the tomb you go, the less it feels like archaeology and more like anthropology of the senses. You're not cataloging artifacts. You're decoding a belief system written entirely in scent. And now, you find yourself before something a little less poetic, but no less fascinating. A workshop ledger. Etched into the wall in tidy hieroglyphs is a list of supplies. Oils, resins, herbs, fats. It looks like a grocery list written by someone preparing to embalm a god. Which, in fairness, is exactly what they were doing. You shine your light across the jars nearby, and they seem different: stickier, darker, earthier, less about charm, more about preservation. This is embalming territory now, and yes, embalming involved perfume. In fact, it involved a lot of it. When royal mummies were prepared, they weren't just dried out and wrapped like deli sandwiches. They were massaged, soaked, and sealed with layer after layer of scented substances: cedar oil, pistachia resin, myrrh, beeswax, animal fat, and sometimes tar black. Heavy, pungent. You remember King Tut's mummy? That sticky, resin-glued mess we talked about earlier. That wasn't a one-off. That was the standard. They literally marinated the dead in divine aroma. Why? Because scent kept decay away, it masked it, fought it, defied it. And more than that, it made a statement. This body will not rot. It will reign forever. One study of royal embalming jars revealed a fascinating detail. Many weren't single scent jars. They were layered. The base might be myrrh, but the surface, lotus, or pine, or cinnamon. Historians still debate whether these layers were functional, different scents for different stages of preservation, or symbolic, matching the journey of the soul through the underworld. Either way, it was olfactory engineering. You lift one of the thicker jars, it's heavy, sealed with a thick black crust of pitch. There's still a faint smell beneath it. Smoky, bitter, medicinal. Imagine working in that room. You're a royal embalmer. You've been chosen not just as a technician, but as a ritual specialist. You wear a lion-headed mask, maybe to honor Sekhmet, goddess of healing. You prepare the oils in a copper basin. Heat them gently. Every movement has meaning. Every scent, a verse. Here's a strange but verified tidbit. Some embalmers use juniper berries not just for scent, but for their antibacterial properties. Others added crushed dates to help bind the oils, or honey for texture. They weren't guessing, they were formulating. You walk to another corner of the room, where the jars shift again in shape. These are tall and thin, shaped like canes, with long necks that make pouring easier. Probably used during the opening of the mouth ceremony, the final ritual before sealing the tomb. In this rite, priests would touch sacred instruments, knives, ladles. Incense sticks to the lips of the deceased, symbolically reawakening their senses, smell included, because what good is an eternity if you can't inhale it? One theory suggests a special oil called tepi was used during this ceremony. We don't know exactly what it contained, but fragments found near burial sites suggest strong traces of cinnamon and cedarwood, warm, sharp, almost piercing, a wake-up scent. a soul's smelling salts. And then there's another ritual, the scenting of the shroud. After wrapping, the entire body was often sprinkled or massaged with one final perfume. Some think it was meant to attract the gods. Others say it was to seal the spiritual process. Fringe theory time. One papyrus mentions a perfume that could lock the cake inside, as though the soul could leak if the scent wasn't strong enough. Silly, maybe, but there's something poetic in it. 2. The idea that a scent could hold the soul in place could pin it like a signature on a document. You lean closer to one jar that has an unusual ridge around its rim. Some experts believe this was for tying strips of perfumed linen directly to the jar so the scent wouldn't just rise into the air, but cling to fabric, to the dead, to the tomb itself. A slow-release diffuser made of ancient cloth. And now, centuries later, you're breathing it in, still faint, still fighting. You step back and take it all in. This wasn't casual perfuming. This was a system, a network, a toolkit for resurrection. A guarantee that when the soul woke up tomorrow, next century, next cosmic cycle, it would still smell like itself. It would still know itself. Because in this tomb, perfume didn't just preserve flesh, it preserved identity. You lean against the stone archway between chambers, the weight of 10 centuries settling gently on your shoulders and on your nose. It's no longer a single smell that fills the air, but layers upon layers, like incense burned over memory itself. Still, one question itches at the back of your mind. Stubborn as sand in a sandal, how did they preserve these scents so long? It seems impossible, doesn't it? Oils that last thousands of years. But here they are, traces still embedded in stone, on cloth, clinging to pottery like secrets that refuse to fade. You move toward another cluster of perfume jars nestled into a niche, arranged like a miniature amphitheater. Some are sealed, some have shattered, and one seems to be sweating. You touch it. A faint film of oil coats the surface. That's not water. That's not desert humidity. That's resin. Specifically, a mix of labdanum and beeswax. Ancient Egypt's version of scent-locking Tupperware. And suddenly, you're back in the workshop. The perfumer doesn't just pour oil into a jar and slap a lid on. No, he paints the rim with warm wax, folds a linen seal over it, ties it with papyrus string, then coats the whole thing in a protective blend of resin and fat, like making jam, but with immortality as the end goal. It worked. The tombs stayed dry, the jars stayed sealed, the scents stayed inside. Historians still marvel at this. Some early archaeologists didn't believe the scents they encountered were original until chemical analysis confirmed tracy ingredients exactly matching ancient recipes. One jar found in the tomb of Ramesses II still carried hints of pine, myrrh, and pistacia resin. Another in Queen Tiye's chamber tested positive for blue lotus and galbanum. That's more than 3,000 years of olfactory persistence. Not bad for a civilization without Ziploc. You crouch beside a broken vessel. Its lid is gone, but a hardened puddle of black resin has sealed the inside like lacquer. You try to scratch it, nothing. Like amber, fossilized scent. Some call this preservation, others call it alchemy. The Egyptians knew their environment. They understood that stone stayed cool, that tombs buried deep in desert cliffs remained undisturbed for centuries, and they engineered their scent vessels to exploit that stability. Alabaster was their favorite smooth, cool, slightly translucent. It didn't just hold oils, it insulated them. The equivalent of a natural refrigeration unit, right there in the Valley of the Kings. Fringe theory time. A few scholars believe certain jars were deliberately buried warm, with freshly heated oils that would cool and solidify inside the tomb, sealing themselves even tighter. Were they wrong? Maybe, but the logic fits. Heat expands, oils flow. Cool air traps. It's ancient physics with a side of mysticism. You walk a bit further and find a jar that looks plain at first small, matte, nothing ornate, but it's heavy. And when you lift it to your ear and shake it gently, something moves. Liquid, still intact. You freeze. You don't dare open it. No archaeologist would, but you do imagine what's inside. Maybe a final blend meant for the pharaoh's rebirth saved until his soul passed the final gate. Maybe a backup perfume in case the others failed. Or maybe it was just his favorite, his comfort scent. We all have one. That one lotion. That one spice. That one faint, ridiculous whiff that reminds us who we are. And for him, that jar sealed for millennia was memory. One study found that certain tombs included duplicate jars, all labeled identically. At first, researchers thought it was redundancy, but another theory suggests that one jar was meant to be smelled by the soul and the other by the gods. Matching scents, one mortal, one divine. You lean back and exhale slowly, letting the musty air fill your lungs. You imagine yourself as a royal embalmer, sealing that final jar. One for you, one for the beyond. A scent twin. You trace your finger across a jar and feel where wax once held fast. The seal is broken now. Of course, the scent long since fled, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels expectant, as if the act of remembering is itself enough to release the fragrance again, a kind of olfactory ghost. And you wonder, what smell would you leave behind? If you had to bottle your soul, not your status, not your titles, just you, would it be cedar and vanilla? Coffee and skin, old books and orange peel? Maybe no one will find it in 3,000 years. But maybe they will. And maybe, just maybe, they'll lean in and whisper, "So this is what you smelled like when you were alive?" And that's immortality, isn't it? Not through statues, not through stories, through scent. You stay seated a while longer, your thoughts swirling like incense smoke in a sealed chamber. The jars have stopped surprising you. At this point, you expect each one to hold a different layer of the pharaoh's identity: warrior, lover, god, ghost. But the next cluster of pots is different. They aren't arranged carefully. They're scattered. Some are chipped, one's tipped over, and all of them share a strange, unglazed roughness. These weren't ceremonial, these were used, and suddenly, it clicks. These were the test jars. You've wandered into the scent studio, or what's left of it, the place where formulas were drafted, trialed, sniffed, and rejected. The ancient version of a perfumer's notebook, made of clay and guesswork. You kneel down and lift a pot. The smell is faint burnt sugar and boiled herbs. Not great. You imagine some poor apprentice presenting this to the high priest, who takes one sniff and gags in divine disapproval. Scent trials weren't always glamorous. Papyrus scrolls from the city of Akhmim suggest that perfume creation was often experimental, and not every batch turned out well. Some recipes call for boiling ingredients together for no less than 14 days. Others warn that too much wine will offend the nostrils of the ka. Imagine working for weeks on a perfume, only to learn your ratio of lemongrass to goat tallow has cursed an afterlife. Historians still argue whether these experiments were limited to temple workshops, or whether secular artisans also had their own scent guilds. One theory proposes that villages had local perfumers who supplied funerary oils to middle-class families. Think eternity on a budget. And it's in this cluttered corner that you start to see a different side of ancient perfumery. Craftsmanship. These weren't nameless jars rolled out of factories. These were handmade, often commissioned for specific individuals. Their ingredients tailored not only to the deceased's role, but to their preferences. Take this one. A narrow-necked vial, etched with a single lotus flower. You open it carefully. The scent is joyful, light, not seductive or heavy like some of the royal blends. This smells like a festival, like fruit stands, flower garlands, sun-warmed mats laid out beside the Nile. You think, maybe this wasn't a pharaoh. Maybe this was someone else. A musician, a scribe, a young wife, someone who wanted to carry a sliver of happiness into the afterlife. And you realize something oddly comforting. Not all these jars were made for power. Some were made for memory, like the jar of almond oil and dates found in the tomb of a child. Sealed with beeswax and covered in feathers, it wasn't for preservation. It was a keepsake, a final bedtime smell, a scent of being held. You find another jar, this one unlike any before it. It's shaped like a tiny ankh, the symbol of life. Inside, a scent so faint you almost miss it. Charcoal, firewood, something like warm stone. You sniff again. It smells like home. Fringe theory time. Some researchers believe certain scents were custom crafted to reflect specific memories, not categories of sacred or seductive, but actual lived experience. One text fragment mentions a jar to smell of mother's roof at noon. Think about that. They bottled places, not just concepts. And when you smell this one, You believe it. Because in a tomb filled with perfumes designed to impress gods, one jar was made to remind a soul where it came from. And isn't that what we all want? You sit back and take it in. Perfume wasn't just about leaving life with grace. It was about carrying life with you. A favorite scent, a remembered hour, a breath held in amber. One jar is sealed with wax molded into the shape of a hand. Maybe that was the perfumer's touch. Maybe it meant held in memory. Or maybe it's literal. This jar smells like someone who held you once. You don't open it. You don't need to, because now you understand. These weren't just possessions. They were people. And in a tomb filled with stone and dust and echoes, it's the perfume that speaks the loudest. You wander back toward the heart of the tomb, past the broken jars and fading fragrances, and suddenly it hits you. The question you didn't know you'd been circling this entire time. Why did the pharaoh need to smell like a god in death, not just smell good divine? Because from everything you've seen, the sacred blends, the imported spices, the perfumer's obsessive precision. This wasn't hygiene. It wasn't even vanity. It was transformation. The pharaoh, in death, wasn't supposed to be remembered as a man. He was supposed to become something else. A god. The jars were part of that metamorphosis. You crouch beside a set of 4 larger urns bulkier than the others, their lids carved with faces. These are not canopic jars. These are olfactory idols. Each lid is sculpted with a slightly different expression, calm, stern, joyful, mournful. You realize they're not just decorative. They may have represented aspects of the pharaoh's divinity moods, perhaps, or roles to play in the afterlife. And each jar, a different perfume. 4 gods, 4 fragrances, 4 identities. One theory suggests these jars were used during different stages of the soul's journey. One sent to greet the underworld, one to repel demons, one to declare status, and one to arrive gloriously in the field of reeds, their version of heaven. Historians still argue whether these multi-scent burial strategies were purely ritual or functioned as a coded theological narrative, but the pattern is undeniable. You find a reference in a nearby inscription: to become Ra at dawn, Osiris at dusk, and Lotus. In all moments between, not metaphor. That's a scent schedule. Lotus was deeply symbolic, tied to rebirth, the Nile's tides, and the sun's daily cycle. And it had a smell all its own, watery, green, slightly narcotic. When the pharaoh was embalmed, lotus oil was used liberally. When his tomb was sealed, dried lotus blossoms were tucked into the linens. He was meant to smell like the cycle of life, and in doing so, he would convince the gods. I'm one of you now. You open a jar just a crack and inhale. Lotus, but not alone. There's myrrh, too, and saffron, a blend of vitality and gravity. It smells like someone important, not flashy, not sensual, just eternal. And in that moment, you realize this wasn't about indulgence. It was about persuasion. The pharaoh didn't hope the gods would remember him. He intended to walk among them smelling like one of their own. And smell mattered because the Egyptian gods weren't distant, silent types. They were present, emotional, scent-sensitive. There are records of a temple statues being bathed in aroma daily, perfumed cloths rubbed across gold surfaces, incense burned in front of carved eyes, oils poured into sacred grooves designed to trap and evaporate slowly. The gods expected maintenance, and if they needed daily scent upkeep, so too did their newest recruit. It makes sense now. The dozens of jars, the sealed vials, the ridiculous quantities of perfume packed into a tomb with no windows. This wasn't just tribute, it was camouflage. The pharaoh didn't want to arrive in the afterlife and be recognized as human. He wanted to arrive and pass as divine. Fringe theory time. Some believe that scents were used not only to please gods, but to confuse them. The right blend might mask human impurity or mimic the scent of a specific deity. Think spiritual cologne fraud. It sounds ridiculous until you remember. Humans have been dressing like gods forever. Why not smell like one? 2. You glance back at the 4 jars with the sculpted faces. Maybe they weren't idols. Maybe they were masks. And each one, a different fragrance to wear, depending on which divine corridor the pharaoh had to walk down. Sun god today, fertility. God tomorrow, judge of the dead next week. You look around the tomb again. You no longer see cluttered pots and broken seals. You see costume changes, a scent wardrobe for the afterlife. And the pharaoh, he wasn't just a corpse. He was a performance. You're back in the central chamber now, surrounded once again by the full olfactory entourage of the afterlife. The pharaoh lies at the center of it all. Quiet, sealed, serene. But you know better now. This isn't stillness. It's preparation. You crouch beside the last unopened chest tucked near the foot of the sarcophagus. Its wood is brittle, banded in copper, and lined with the black smudges of centuries-old fingerprints. You pry it open gently, hinges groaning softly, like they haven't moved since the Nile last flooded. Inside, a nest of shredded linen, and tucked in the middle, nestled like a jewel, a bundle of small clay bottles. They're different from the others, less ornate. No gold, no hieroglyphs, just a cluster of scent pots wrapped in reed fiber and sealed with pitch, almost like travel-sized perfumes. Of course, you found the emergency stash, the just-in-case-you-wake-up-early collection, because, as odd as it sounds, ancient Egyptians did consider the possibility of a delayed resurrection, that the soul might awake in mid-journey, disoriented, and need tools to reassert its divine identity. And what's the fastest way to trigger memory? Smell. Modern neuroscience confirms it. The olfactory nerve connects directly to the amygdala and hippocampus memory and emotions front desk. That's why you smell a pine tree and think of winter, or cinnamon. And remember your grandmother's kitchen. The pharaoh, thousands of years before Freud, knew this too, or at least his priests did. Historians still debate whether these last-minute scent bundles were for use by the soul or left as offerings for visiting deities. But here's what we know. They were hidden, packed tight, and powerful. You open one bottle very gently, and the scent that escapes is jarring, metallic, acrid, almost bitter, not pleasant, not comforting. You cough slightly and pull back. Maybe this one wasn't meant to soothe. Maybe it was meant to defend. Fringe theory time. Some scholars suggest these scents were protective decoys. If a jealous spirit or wandering demon approached the tomb, the jars could be opened to release a smell so potent, so wrong, that it would confuse or repel them. Ancient Egyptian security system. Deploy the bad perfume. Other theories say the scent wasn't meant for enemies, but for the soul itself, a slap to the senses. Wake up! Remember who you are. You are not a husk. You are divine. You close the jar and inspect another. This one's better. Woody. Clean. The scent of cedar and crushed mint like a Nile breeze blowing through a sacred grove. And just like that, you're back in a palace. Courtyards full of singing girls, priests with shaved heads, offerings piled high in the morning light. One jar, one breath, one memory. You open a third. Nothing. Just dust. Still, it smells like something. Faintly like rain. Impossible, of course, but you smile anyway, because by now, you've realized that not all scent is chemical. Some of it is intentional. You sit back, cradling the bundle of jars in your lap like an offering. This wasn't an emergency kit. This was a starter pack for eternity, a welcome bag for the soul, packed lovingly by priests and perfumers, the way we pack a child's suitcase. Extra shirt, toothbrush, favorite toy. But here, it's fragrance for strength, fragrance for clarity, fragrance for divinity, fragrance for remembrance. And maybe one that just smelled like a fig orchard because, why not? Because if the afterlife was long and lonely and shadowed by judgment, you'd want some part of your old world to follow you. You place the bundle back in its chest, gently, quietly, and for a second, you imagine the pharaoh's soul waking, stretching, reaching toward those jars not for treasure, not for titles, but for that one smell that says, "This was me." You linger now, on the threshold of leaving, but the tomb doesn't quite let you go. The air here clings like perfume on skin, thick with time, with purpose, with something close to presence. You glance around one last time, letting your eyes trace the cracked walls, the spilled jars, the gilded lids still whispering in silence. There's one final pot near the door, alone, unsealed, and when you lift it, it's nearly weightless. Its contents long evaporated. But still, when you tilt it toward your nose, the scent rises faintly from its clay, a ghost of spikenard and rose. You know this one. It's a scent often mentioned in funeral rites. An anointing blend, not dramatic, not mysterious, just tender, a scent of letting go. Some historians believe this perfume was used by mourners at the tomb's closing ceremony, a final gift to the pharaoh, and a farewell to the person he used to be. Not the god, not the myth, but the man. And so the jar was left near the door, right where the last person would pass, offering one final breath before the stone was sealed, a parting inhalation, an exit perfume. You set the jar back down, careful not to disturb its stillness. And now, you're ready. The scent has faded. The tomb is quiet, but the story is still in the air. You take one final look at the chamber and step outside. The light stings your eyes, the desert wind hits your face, and for a brief moment, the scent comes with you. You smell the past, not as a memory, but as a presence. Let the air grow still now. Let the torches burn low in your mind. You've walked among stone and silence, through tombs built not to impress but to preserve, to transform, to hold the shape of the soul through scent. You've traced the jars, unwrapped the meanings, and followed aroma like a thread through the corridors of time. And now, you're returning. Slowly, softly, the sands outside are cool. The stars above don't blink. The wind carries no voice but hums like the inside of a seashell, ancient, round, and endless. You're no longer in the tomb, but the scent still clings somewhere behind your eyes. You can still smell the first jar, the fire oil, the lotus, the almond, the ghost of the perfume that reminded you of home. And maybe that's the point. That memory isn't kept in stone or ink. It's kept in the breath, in the trace, in the way your chest rises without thinking. And so, tonight, let your breath slow. Let your shoulders soften. Let your thoughts curl like smoke towards sleep. You are not embalmed, not mummified, not bound in linen, but like the pharaoh, you are scent and memory, warmth and presence, human and divine in your own quiet way. May your rest be deep. May your dreams be layered with light, with darkness, with spice. And may you wake tomorrow still holding something faint and lovely in the air around you. Something that says, you were here,